I mean, your boy Donald Trump, he
My
jacked up
boy
the
Donald
deficit.
Trump. Do you even know me, guy? Your boy Donald Trump. Like, dude, I voted for Evan McMullen in 2016, and he's proving to be a pretty disappointing when it comes to like his free trade and gun rights positions and whatnot. You seem to be very that's another thing. You seem pretty apathetic when it comes to gun rights, especially for somebody who claims to want to bring back full automatic rifles. Like, I just want to like ask of how important gun rights is to you.
Um, in terms of issues I would be voting on, it wouldn't even make the top 10.
Wouldn't even make the top 10. That's
Um, I, the
kind
issues
of
that
what I
I care,
suspected.
I don't give a fuck. How many guns you have. All the guns in the world is not going to protect you from the modern corporate oligarchy.
You're talking about the government and the military and police and whatnot. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it,
can think that it's hopeless all you want, but a lot of us would rather go down fighting. Thank you. If
but
something
it could
like
be
a
pointless. That's the thing. The military, the difference between you and a bunch of rednecks with shotguns and a standard modern military unit is so vast. It's laughable.
a lot of people in elections, like particularly in the districts where they are outnumbered by a huge majority, they would probably think that it's in their case anyways. It probably is overall pointless that they be voting,
No,
but it doesn't. But that
that's not.
doesn't mean that you don't vote at all. Like in the case of
No,
what we're
no, no.
talking about
You're
here,
you're not
like
you're
the
not
case that we're
understanding my point.
like
You're not understanding my
can
point.
I finish
The,
my
the,
point?
no,
Let
I know what your point is, and I'm about to tell you why you're wrong. This is not about you know like being like AOC and overcoming such a huge monetary advantage that the other guys had by sheer willpower and ability to campaign and force of will. This is you know you know you the average American citizen versus the average American military soldier. You know,
Yeah, and
that,
how much do gun owners in America outnumber the military? And plus, there are some of the military
it
that
could be
will.
it could be a million to one. The military would still win. The military has tanks. They have planes. They have drones. The military could kill a million American
So
citizens without ever setting a single
you're.
military soldier in harm's way.
I don't really see this as a case that people should just give up. Like if they think that they should just stand
I,
up to the government or
how am I saying?
revolution or
How am I
whatever.
saying to give up?
Well,
Yeah,
you're saying that you're kind of saying that it's pointless, which that
no,
almost
no,
kind of implies it.
no. This is just simply understanding that your guns is not going to protect you. You have to safeguard your rights. You have to check. You have to check the government, check the private corporations. Keep them in check, so they don't. So you're not put in a situation where you're just hopelessly outgunned, outmaneuvered, with no recourse.
Okay. I mean, you can say that it's pointless all you want, but that still is not going to make people stop resisting or thinking that guns are not important to help out in resisting in one way or another. It's I mean even like putting aside
Again, you're not
even
understanding the point.
putting aside the whole government aspect, people will still want guns to defend themselves from the common criminal, at least.
Again, you're
That's
not
very
understanding
important.
the point. The idea that your guns are there to protect you from the big bad government. You know, That would have been true in the days of muzzle loaders, or even early repeaters, but not with the military we have now. That it you know it the modern military is just you know several orders of magnitude more capable than a standard
You kind of
civilian force.
you're kind of essentially repeating the same point that it's hopeless, just in different words, seemingly.
No, I am not saying it's hopeless. I'm saying guns will not.
I
You
thought that was what
can't
you said
rely on
earlier.
on the ideas of having a gun to protect your rights, because when it gets to that point, it will be hopeless.
I you say it's not hopeless, but then you say at the end of that statement, it will be hopeless. And
No,
I thought,
listen to my words. You cannot rely on your guns to protect your rights, because by the time it gets to that point, it will be hopeless. You have to safeguard your rights. You have to check, the people in power. All right, that's where you know
I mean, sure, vote for the short term of things, so that your liberties do not get infringed upon and whatnot.
no
But
voting is the long term solution.
it's a long term. Well,
Getting
whatever it be,
you know
whatever it be. I mean, there are a
getting
lot of people that there are a lot of people that make the case that no matter how you vote, it's still in the long term, the government will just get a more bigger and bloated and start infringing more and more on people's rights, and it's just a really
yeah,
uphill battle that's almost hopeless.
yeah, those people are empty headed morons.
Hmm. Hmm.
The long term goal, you got to get private money out of politics. You got to get special interest money out of politics.
And
You got
how likely is that to be?
How likely?
How
Uh,
likely is that to happen? I mean,
it'll be a pretty damn difficult fight.
exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to make the point. It's a pretty damn difficult fight to where it almost seems hopeless. And in the same scenario of going back to the whole citizens fighting against the government, it seems almost hopeless. But despite whether or not the people will win or not, it's kind of
Well,
a moot
well,
point.
well,
Some
well,
people would rather go down fighting. I know I
why would
probably
you
would.
rather rely on your guns than rely on fixing the system within?
Okay, fixing the system within. If that is a possibility, if okay, if my circumstance and scenario is, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Is okay, if I can take the patience, if my circumstance and scenario permits me to be patient enough with the government, well then fine, yeah, I'll take that route, fix the system from within. But say for example, if the government actually started physically systematically rounding people up just because they're minorities or just because they're Christian or even I'm thinking of some rather I guess one could say out there situations. But say if the government was to just systematically round people up off of arbitrary reasons, that's the type of situation I'm talking about right there. If that happens, then the people will want to resist. And despite it's whether or not the people will win or not, they would rather go down fighting than just hold their hands out and let themselves get arrested and round up and whatnot.
Well, once again, once you've gotten to that point, it's hopeless. You,
They
the,
still would rather go down fighting. Still rather go
I'm
down fighting.
talking about not getting to that point, preventing getting to that point.
Okay.
What
Okay,
is
and
your
more power to you. More power to you.
and
But
what is your plan to not get to that to prevent getting to that point? I've got us on the left. We have ideas. We have plans. It's called campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics.
and
You
on the
know,
right we have a little thing called I think it's called a constitutional amendment as to where to get the power so that it's not as much centralized in the federal government and like relinquish that power more into state power. I mean,
That is so fucking
I
dumb.
know that you are not exactly for state powers and whatnot. I don't. You say that's
I mean,
dumb, but have you actually researched on it? Have you actually?
how would that actually put more power into the hands of the people
I don't know the
so they
nitty
so they
gritty
can
details of it.
they can more directly check the power of government.
I don't know the nitty gritty details of it. I just heard of the
And
idea
that's the
presented
problem.
by. I just heard the idea presented by Mark Levin, a constitutional lawyer who probably would know the details more than me.
Mark Levin's a fucking idiot.
And I can say the same about your senpai, Kyle Kalinske. But that's besides the point, though. That's besides the point, though, ain't it? And also Cenk Uygur, if you like him. I don't know all the role models that you like, but
Oh my god! Like
but that besides, but that aside, you go,
I can
but that
explain to you.
but that aside, but that aside, but that
I
aside,
can't
we're not
explain
talking
to
about
you
political
how
icons, though.
finance
We're
reform
we're not we're not.
would check the power of government. I can explain to you how introducing stuff like ranked choice voting would check the power of government. You can't do any of that with your ideas.
Maybe if you want me to go more researching into it, well then fine, whatever. But rewinding this back to what you said earlier, the left has solutions, the right does not. I just mentioned you an idea right there, is all. There's also the idea of other things like trying to loosen up gun rights like that. I don't know how popular it is, but some people on the right would like to see the 1986 assault rifles ban repealed, for one thing.
It's null and void.
Null and void.
There's a sunset clause on it.
No, I said the 1986 assault rifles ban. I'm not talking about the 1993 assault weapons ban. Two different bills. As far as I know,
What did the 1986 assault rifles ban do?
it was supposed to ban the further sale and production of any new fully automatic weapons.
Oh.
The 1993 assault weapons ban, that was supposed to ban the possession and okay. It was supposed to ban the possession and production of any further AR-15s and, limit the size of magazine that you are allowed to possess. And I think there was something about universal background checks as well on guns and whatnot. But those are just some other ideas from the right and tried to preserve our liberties and so forth. Preserving gun rights or even repealing some laws that are meant to relinquish some gun rights. For example, the 1986 assault rifles.
Once again, how does giving you more access to guns protect your other rights, like your freedom of speech, which is being consistently and constantly, treaded upon by not only the government, but by private institutions.
The idea regarding owning a gun right, excuse me, owning a gun. My bad. The idea of owning a gun is that if you want to speak, then go ahead and speak. And if the police decide to come up to you and say, hey, you're not allowed to say that or whatever, then you pull out your gun and say, fight me, bitch.
And then how the fuck did Martin Luther King Jr. He and the rest of the civil rights movement, almost universally non-violently, get rid of segregation.
More power to them.
I mean, there was a few of them. There was a few of them that used guns that advocated for violence. Although Malcolm X never really actually advocated for violence, he just advocated for, violence in defense of yourself. But, none of them actually engaged in violence and using guns.
Okay, more
How
power
are
to
they?
them. Here's
How,
another example,
how,
though.
no, no, hey, fuck, no. How are they able to, institute one of the most sweeping, you know, changes in human rights in the in the 19th in the 20th century without ever actually using guns. They just marched and protested peacefully.
I say more power to them. But here's another example: Clyde Bundy. Now, as much people want to debate as to whether or not he had an actual legitimate claim on that land, which I would say that he did, but nonetheless, he had a standoff with the police in that instance to protect his land. That would be a staple example right there of some average Joe Schmo and his gang of buddies just protecting their rights, in this case, the right of ownership of that land from the government. As far as MLK and the rest of the civil rights movement goes, I say good for them. Like, I'm not trying to degenerate their, I don't know what you would say for that, what word you would put that to. I'm not trying to degenerate their efforts and their successes in that regard. I'm just trying to say that basically guns are supposed to be like a last resort when it comes to, protecting your rights.
Yeah, but why are people like you and others on the right so focused on the last resort where you should be focused on the first, second, and third resort?
Well,
You
we
know
are focused on the first, second, and third resort as well, but
what? How?
there's
Where?
also the other aspect regarding gun rights as well: protection from the common criminal.
No, no, you're still focused on guns. Well, what about your first, second, third resorts?
Um,
You
what?
know,
First, second, and third resorts? Well, then,
what about your friend? How do you use your freedom of speech? How do you use your freedom of protest? How do you
that's
do campaign
fine.
fire? So focused on the last resort, gotta use my guns to defend against the evil government when you should
Hold on a
prevent the
second. I
government
had
from
an
when you
OBS
should be
disconnect for
preventing
a
the
second.
well, which Tea Party?
Which Tea Party?
Are you talking about the
I'm
Are you
talking. No,
talking
I'm
about
talking about
the
the.
Boston Tea Party or the Ted Cruz Tea Party?
I'm talking about the more modern. Well, both actually, for that matter. The more modern Party as well. They
Yeah.
had their own protests where they were like physically walking out in the streets and whatnot. And
Yeah, and I
also the
will admit
issue.
they were rather successful,
Okay,
which is
well
why
then,
we got
thank you
people
for
like
admitting that.
yeah, but that's because they used because they didn't resort to the last resort. They actually
Okay.
used their
No, no, no.
gun.
You were asking about the first, second, and third resort. That's just a matter. That's just an example of the first, second, and third resort, or whatever,
Except
succession you want to put that in. They did not resort to the last resort. That's just an example of them not resorting to the last resort, and
except
also
how have you? How,
protesting against abortion as well. Like not,
oh
yeah,
God.
there's like that one whack job who wants to resort to going ahead and just blowing up an abortion clinic, killing an abortionist or whatever. And I would overall, yeah, actually no, I would pretty much condemn that, because mostly just because abortion is not an objectively viewed issue, an objectively uh, viewed as an objectively immoral issue. But still, people are like just protesting in that area.
Uh,
But that aside, we're not talking about abortion. We're talking about first, second, and third resort, and not to mention
I mean, it
the
all plays into
Republican
one another.
the Republican voting base. They do vote as much as they care about gun rights. They do go to the resort of voting before they ever have to, whip out their guns to go fight in the government and whatnot. And again, I must emphasize, I don't know if you're like hearing me on this point. Another reason as to why gun rights is so important is because they want to protect themselves from the common criminal. We want to protect ourselves from the common criminal. And I would think that you would too.
Except you know such things are so so rare.
Three
You're
million cases.
you're more likely to shoot yourself in the face than ever, have to defend yourself,
Three million,
from a
3 million
criminal.
cases.
What?
There was an
Uh,
article that I had read talking about that there were like around like at least 1 to 3 million cases of where guns were used in self-defense. Well, and it doesn't even really matter as to whether they actually had to pull the trigger or not. Just the mere possession of that firearm, knowing that they were able to defend themselves, the criminal just backs off, just walks off.
funny how you went from like defender against to go. The whole thing we're talking about is how do we check the power of government? Now you're going,
They're
how do we
both
make sure
important.
the criminals don't steal my purse?
They're both important, Ham.
Except
They're both. I don't know what the point was supposed to be right there. We view as both of those as being important.
except how do you solve the problems with criminals? Do you solve it reactively or proactively? I would advocate for solving it proactively.